I found out I had willingly signed a $380,000 mortgage while wearing my pajamas and remembering nothing. In my hand was a photo me signing the papers, eyes blank, fingers trembling, and behind me, my daughter smiling. If you think this is just another family drama, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now for more haunting, unforgettable stories just like this. The story begins. The October breeze swept gently through the cracked kitchen window, carrying with it the faint scent of cinnamon from the neighborhood bakery. Evelyn Ashcroft, 68, sat upright at her mahogany piano, her back perfectly aligned, not out of vanity but out of years of habit and grace that refused to surrender to age. Her fingers, slightly gnarled from time but still elegant, glided over the ivory keys with an ease that masked the subtle ache that lived in her joints. Chopin in the morning, Mozart in the afternoon. She didn't play to impress anyone. She played because silence felt too lonely. Music was her language, her armor, her prayer. Her modest home in the heart of Charlottesville was tidy sunlit and smelled of lavender and old books. She lived alone, not out of misfortune, but by choice, a hard-earned choice, after years of navigating a world that often underestimated women like her. Her late husband Leonard had died young, leaving her a single mother to a daughter she had poured everything into Bianca. Now, decades later, Evelyn found solace in the small joys of her quiet life, tending to her backyard roses, baking scones for the neighborhood kids, and teaching piano lessons to the children of overworked single parents. Each Tuesday and Thursday, the laughter and off-key notes of 8-year-olds filled her living room, and she loved it. It reminded her that the world, though broken in many ways, could still be kind in small corners. She never expected more. Not anymore, not at her age. And then came the knock. Not just any knock, the precise rhythmic rapping that always belonged to one person, Bianca. Evelyn opened the door with a practiced smile, the kind of smile you wear for someone you love more than they probably deserve. Mom. Bianca said, sunglasses perched atop her sleek blonde hair. Navy blue pantsuit, freshly pressed perfume, expensive and subtle. She stepped inside before waiting for an answer. A habit Evelyn had long stopped correcting. You look amazing. New sweater. Evelyn chuckled softly. No, dear. Same old cardigan. The lavender one you told me to throw out last Christmas. Bianca kissed her mother on the cheek, already scanning the living room with a critical eye, noting the untouched stack of newspapers, the analog clock, the pale blue curtains Evelyn had sewn herself 20 years ago. Her daughter never outright said it, but Evelyn knew her home was quaint, which was Bianca's polite way of saying outdated. I like it, Bianca lied, sitting down at the breakfast nook with the grace of someone trained to command boardrooms. She was 38, razor-sharp and successful in the kind of way Evelyn could never quite relate to. She had climbed the ranks in corporate finance faster than most men twice her age, and somewhere along the way she had shed softness like an old coat. Still, Evelyn loved her with a tenderness that bordered on blind. Coffee, Evelyn asked. Only if you've got oat milk. I have whole milk and a pinch of nostalgia. Bianca laughed, but it was tight and distracted. Water's fine. Evelyn returned with the glass and sat across from her, her knees careful, her smile patient. She could tell something was coming. Bianca never visited in the middle of the week unless something was brewing. Her daughter wasn't the type for casual drop-ins. I have to ask you something, Mom, Bianca said, smoothing her hands over the tabletop. Her nails were perfectly manicured, her voice measured as if she were speaking to a client, not her mother. It's important, but it's also temporary, totally temporary. Evelyn tilted her head. You sound like you're about to sell me a vacuum. Bianca exhaled a quiet laugh, then leaned in. Okay, here's the deal. There's a property I'm looking at down in Charleston. A gorgeous 2-bedroom condo overlooking the water. It's a steal, pre-market listing, but I need to move fast. Evelyn waited. Bianca continued. I'm already approved for part of the loan through my firm's investment branch, but the broker suggested having a secondary name on the initial transaction, someone with a stable profile, just temporarily, for 3 to 6 months tops. Evelyn blinked. And you want that name to be mine? Yes, Bianca said smoothly, taking a sip of water like it was nothing. Just your name on the paperwork. Technically, it's more like a formality. I'll handle everything, payments, taxes, whatever. It'll never touch your credit, I promise. Evelyn's smile faltered. But why not use your own name for all of it? Bianca shrugged. Corporate loans are tricky. Some firms have restrictions about outside investments. You know how politics are in finance. Having your name on it just gives me a little more freedom. Evelyn sat back. The room felt suddenly smaller. I don't know, Bea. I've never signed anything I didn't understand completely. Bianca reached across the table, her tone softening in a way that Evelyn hadn't heard since Bianca was a child. Mom, please. You've always said I'm smart, right? You trust me, don't you? Evelyn looked at her daughter, her only child, her blood. She remembered the nights of single motherhood, staying up grading papers while Bianca slept in the next room, the packed lunches, the recital dresses she sewed by hand, the whispered encouragements before college interviews. Trust her. Of course she did. Evelyn had trusted her with her heart, her years, her very reason for pushing forward. She smiled weakly. It's not that I don't trust you, Bea. It's just, this isn't like giving you my spare keys. Bianca squeezed her hand. I know, I really do, but it's just temporary. Think of it as helping me get my foot in the door. And Evelyn, against the quiet voice in the back of her mind, nodded. That evening after Bianca left, documents unsigned, but to be delivered soon, Evelyn stood at the window, the piano silent behind her. She watched as her daughter walked briskly to her Lexus, speaking rapidly into her phone, likely about interest rates and return margins and God knows what else. Bianca looked so in control, so successful. Evelyn felt something unfamiliar press against her chest, a tightness she couldn't name. She turned back to her piano. Her hands hovered above the keys, but this time they didn't move. Not even for Chopin. The days began to stretch longer after that. The autumn sun mellowed out, draping Charlottesville in golden warmth. But inside Evelyn's house something had shifted. It was subtle at first, like the change in a familiar melody that you can't quite put your finger on. Bianca stopped calling regularly. Evelyn had grown used to the Tuesday and Saturday check-ins, even if they were brief, even if they were more updates than conversations. But now Tuesday came and went, then Saturday, then the following week. Evelyn tried not to think much of it. She was busy too. She had little Theo working on his scales, Lucy preparing for a school recital. The music filled her afternoons, and the children in their innocent clumsiness distracted her from the cold silence of her phone. Still, when Evelyn did call, Bianca always picked up eventually. The excuses were always the same. Work had been hectic, meetings ran late, Wi-Fi at the office was spotty. Evelyn nodded understanding. Of course she did. Bianca was a modern woman with modern stress. Evelyn had once juggled a full teaching schedule and a toddler while grading 120 algebra quizzes in a week. She knew what pressure felt like, and yet something didn't sit right. It wasn't until the third envelope that Evelyn truly felt the unease bloom. She had returned home from grocery shopping one crisp morning, a brown paper bag full of apples, oats, and black tea hanging on her forearm. As she approached her door, she noticed a white envelope sticking halfway out of her mailbox. It bore the clean insignia of Eastland Federal Bank, Bianca's bank. Her name was printed in block letters across the front, Evelyn Ashcroft. She picked it up, frowning. Back inside, she unpacked slowly the envelope, still resting on the counter. After putting away the yogurt and wiping down the counter, she finally reached for the letter. But just as her finger slipped under the flap, the doorbell rang. She opened the door to see Bianca, sunglasses on, breathless. Mom. Oh, good, you're home. I left my tablet here last time, I think. Can I check real quick? Evelyn stepped aside, momentarily distracted. Sure, dear. Check the piano bench. Bianca stepped inside, heading for the living room. Evelyn turned back toward the kitchen, then froze. The envelope was gone. She blinked, looked around, checked the sink, the counter, the trash. Nothing. Her hands went cold. "Bianca," she called. In the living room, her daughter answered casually. Evelyn didn't mention the envelope. She didn't ask. She told herself perhaps she was mistaken, that maybe she'd left it outside. Maybe it had blown away. Maybe the postman was wrong. But she knew. Deep down she knew. Bianca left 10 minutes later, tablet in hand and a tight smile on her face. That night, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table sipping tea and staring at the mail pile. Something gnawed at her, not fear, not quite, but a strange sense of being handled like a pawn, moved 2 spaces forward without understanding why. Days passed. Then another envelope appeared. This time Evelyn moved fast. She snatched it up and slipped it inside her apron pocket before even entering the house. It was thinner than the last, and when she held it up to the light, she could make out numbers, interest rates, account statements. She wasn't sure. She tucked it inside a recipe book in the kitchen drawer. Bianca didn't visit that day, but she called that night. "How are you, Mom? Did anything come in the mail for me?" "For you," Evelyn's voice held steady. "Well, not directly addressed, but you know, sometimes stuff gets sent here by accident. Junk mail, flyers." "I haven't checked today," Evelyn lied. A pause on the other end. "Okay, just let me know if anything comes. No big deal." They hung up shortly after. Evelyn didn't sleep much that night. The envelope remained untouched, still buried beneath the recipe for buttermilk biscuits. She wanted to open it. Her fingers itched. But something in her hesitated, not because she was afraid of what was inside, but because she feared what it might confirm. In the following weeks, the fatigue began. It came in waves, slow, heavy waves that dragged her down in the middle of her routines. One moment she was playing a simple sonata, the next. Her fingers hovered over the keys, unsure of the next note. Her eyelids would droop in the middle of folding laundry. Her head would dip forward as she read. Evelyn had never napped during the day, not even in her 50s. She found it indulgent, wasteful even. But now, after Bianca's visits, always accompanied by tea, she insisted on brewing herself. Evelyn found herself drifting. It started with soft yawns, then full slumps on the couch, then moments she couldn't recall at all. She would wake up 2 hours later, tucked under a throw blanket. She didn't remember pulling up with the teacup rinsed and placed in the sink. At first she chalked it up to age, to early winter lethargy. She even mentioned it offhandedly to Bianca once. "Do you think I'm getting old?" "You've always been old, Mom," Bianca teased. "You just finally noticed." But Evelyn wasn't laughing. Then came the night. It was raining. Not heavily, but the kind of persistent drizzle that made the roof sigh and the gutters murmur. Evelyn had gone to bed early. She'd taught a new student that afternoon, an 11-year-old boy named James, who liked video games more than music and had no patience for quarter notes. Her body ached from standing too long. Her head throbbed. She climbed into bed, pulled the quilt over her shoulders, and stared at the ceiling fan spinning slow, hypnotic circles. And then nothing. No dreams, no sounds, just blackness. When Evelyn opened her eyes again, the room was dark, but she was no longer under the covers. She was seated at the dining room table. Her hands gripped a pen in front of her paper, several sheets of it. She blinked slowly as if waking from anesthesia. Her head swayed slightly. The air smelled of chamomile. A teacup empty sat beside her. She looked down. Her signature, over and over again on different pages, some familiar, some not. She stood the chair legs scraping across the floor with a sound like a scream. She staggered to the kitchen sink, splashed cold water on her face. Her reflection in the window above the sink was pale, eyes clouded. She didn't remember how she got there. She didn't remember signing anything. She didn't remember drinking tea. Back at the table, the papers were gone. So was the pen. So was the empty cup. Had she imagined it? Sleepwalked? Was it a dream? A hallucination? Evelyn clutched the edge of the counter. She was alone, and yet she had never felt more watched. The next morning, Bianca called. "Mom, you okay? I had the weirdest dream about you last night." Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened. "What kind of dream?" "You were lost in the house, looking for something." Evelyn said nothing. Bianca chuckled awkwardly. "Anyway, weird, right? You sure you're feeling okay? I'm fine. You sound tired. I didn't sleep well. Well, rest up. I'll stop by tomorrow. Maybe we can do some tea and a movie. Evelyn almost said yes. Almost. Instead, she said no. I think I need a few days. There was a pause. Bianca didn't push. Okay, I get it. Call me if you need anything. I will. She hung up. Then slowly, deliberately, Evelyn opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out the envelope she had hidden. She didn't open it yet. She simply laid it on the table flat, untouched. Her tea kettle hissed behind her. She didn't move to turn it off. Something had begun unraveling, and it was time to follow the thread. The envelope came on a Thursday. It was plain white, unmarked, except for her name typed neatly in the center, Mrs. Evelyn Ashcroft. The paper felt heavier than usual, stiff with some kind of importance like legal documents often are. No return address, no personal touch. Just weight, physical and emotional. Evelyn held it in her hands for a long time without opening it. The kitchen clock ticked softly behind her, and outside the window, sparrows gathered on the bare branches of the backyard elm. She set the envelope down on the table, then picked it up again. Something about it felt final, unavoidable. She had opened 1,000 letters in her life. This one made her palms sweat. With trembling fingers, she finally tore it open. Inside was a single-page letter on professional-grade paper with the letterhead of Eastland Federal Mortgage Services. Her eyes scanned the page slowly, but one line in bold near the middle reached out and strangled the air from her lungs. This letter serves as confirmation of the active mortgage loan of $380,000 taken out under the name Evelyn M. Ashcroft, secured against property at 1124 Mayflower Drive, Charleston, SC. She read it again and again. Her name, her address, her full Social Security number printed in fine ink. All correct. But the property, the loan, the amount. She hadn't bought any property. She hadn't applied for a mortgage. She hadn't even been to Charleston in 20 years. Her chair scraped hard against the wood floor as she stood up, hands shaking. She picked up the cordless phone, dialing her daughter's number from memory. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. She stared at the phone, her lips parted, her heart thudding against her ribs. Bianca always picked up on the second ring. Always. She pressed redial. Voicemail. Hi, you've reached Bianca Ashcroft. Leave a message and I'll return your call shortly. Beep. Bianca, this is your mother. I got something in the mail. From a mortgage company. A letter. With my name on it. I need to talk to you. Call me back, please, right away. She hung up, dropped the phone on the table, and sat back down hard, her breath ragged short. Her fingers gripped the edge of the chair as if bracing for an earthquake. Then she stood up again. She didn't have time for panic, not now. Her mind, trained for decades in the logic of music and structure, began grasping for order. Notes, keys, patterns. She needed help. And there was one name, one person who came to mind like the opening chord of a familiar melody. Miles Vance. He had been one of her piano students once, many years ago. Back when he was just a quiet, observant boy with large glasses and a nervous smile. He had hated arpeggios, loved Chopin. But more than anything, he had respected Evelyn even as a child. Years later, she heard he'd become a legal consultant, contracts and identity law, if she remembered right. She dug out the local alumni newsletter from her file cabinet, scanned the back page, and found his name under Career Spotlight. She dialed his number without hesitation. Hello, a voice answered, smooth, assured adult. Miles, this is Evelyn Ashcroft. I'm not sure if you remember me. There was a brief pause, then a warm laugh. Mrs. Ashcroft. Of course I remember you. You taught me how to sight read, and you introduced me to Debussy. She smiled for the first time all day. I'm sorry to call out of the blue. Something has happened. Something serious. And I think I need help. Your kind of help. His tone shifted immediately. Tell me where you are. 15 minutes later, Miles stood in her kitchen, tall now, broad-shouldered with graying temples and a leather briefcase slung over one arm. His tie was slightly askew, as though he'd abandoned a meeting to come. He looked around with quiet nostalgia as he entered the memories flashing behind his lawyer's eyes. You haven't changed a bit, he said. "Oh, don't flatter an old woman," she replied, handing him the letter. He read in silence. When he looked up, the warmth had drained from his expression. "Did you authorize this?" Evelyn's throat tightened. "Absolutely not." "And this address in Charleston, do you have any connection to it?" "No." Miles frowned, reading further. "Your social security number?" "This is all correct." "Which means this isn't just a simple clerical error." Evelyn nodded. "I was afraid of that." He placed the letter carefully on the table and opened his briefcase, pulling out a legal pad and a small pen. "Okay, let's take this step by step. First, when was the last time you signed any legal documents?" She hesitated. "A few months ago. My daughter, Bianca, she asked me to sign something. She said it was a temporary financial authorization. I trusted her." He paused. "Did you read what you were signing?" "No, not closely. It was just a few pages. She said it was standard." Evelyn's voice cracked. "I didn't think she would lie to me." Miles scribbled notes, his pen moving fast. "She's the only one who could have accessed this kind of personal data," he said. "Name, address, social, birth date. Most of that wouldn't be public knowledge." Evelyn sat down again, suddenly aware of how drained she felt. "And there's more," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been tired, lethargic, especially after tea, the kind Bianca makes when she visits. There are gaps in my memory, Miles. There was one night, I woke up at the table and there were papers in front of me. I think I signed something, but I don't remember doing it." Miles froze. "You think she drugged you?" "I don't want to believe it." "That's not a denial, Evelyn." She looked away. He leaned forward, folding his hands. "Do you have anything else? Any other documents you've received?" She nodded slowly, rose from her chair, and returned moments later with the envelope she had hidden in her recipe book. Miles opened it and scanned quickly. Bank statement, multiple wire transfers, a deposit for $50,000 made under your name into an escrow account. His voice was clipped, now sharp like a conductor's baton. "Evelyn, this is serious. It looks like your name and identity have been used to open a mortgage, transfer money, maybe even secure a second line of credit." "I don't understand," she whispered. "How would Bianca benefit from using my name? She might have poor credit, or she's doing something off the books. It doesn't matter. What matters is that this is a clear pattern of identity abuse, fraud, potential forgery." He leaned back, looking her directly in the eyes. "We need to act immediately." She nodded, but her chest ached. I can't believe she would do this to me." Miles softened. "I know, but we have to assume the worst now, not hope for the best." Evelyn stared down at her hands. They trembled. "What's the first step?" "I'll run a soft background check using your information. We'll check your credit report for any accounts or debts you didn't authorize. You'll also need to request official documentation from the mortgage company, and we'll contact an identity protection agency to begin monitoring for new activity." He paused. "And Evelyn, if she forged anything signatures, power of attorney, loan papers, we'll need to gather proof." Evelyn closed her eyes. She saw Bianca as a toddler running barefoot through the yard, chocolate on her cheeks, shouting, "Look at me, Mommy," as she twirled. The girl who cried when Evelyn kissed her scraped knees, the teenager who asked her mother to braid her hair for graduation. That same girl had turned into the woman who may have stolen her identity. "I want to believe this is a misunderstanding," Evelyn said quietly, "but I know it's not." Miles didn't respond. He didn't need to. They both knew what came next. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Ashcroft felt like a stranger in her own name. The bank building was newer than Evelyn remembered. It stood tall and spotless, all glass and marble, shimmering under a weak November sun that could no longer warm. Miles had offered to drive, and Evelyn accepted without protest. Her hands were too unsteady to hold a steering wheel, and the letter she'd received still throbbed in her chest like a fresh bruise. They sat quietly in the car as he parked. Neither of them said anything. Miles glanced at her once before they stepped out, his voice low but steady. "You ready?" Evelyn nodded. She wasn't. Inside, everything smelled of air conditioning and money. The silence wasn't silence, not really. It was filled with keyboard clicks, murmured phone calls, the distant ding of elevators. Evelyn followed Miles across the polished floor, her shoes echoing behind him like reluctant footsteps in a funeral procession. At the front desk, a young man looked up and greeted them with a customer service smile too wide to be sincere. "Welcome to Eastland Federal. How can I help you today?" Miles leaned in businesslike. "This is Mrs. Evelyn Ashcroft. We're here to access her safe deposit box." The young man blinked, looked to Evelyn. "Of course, ma'am. May I see your identification?" Evelyn reached into her purse with hands that trembled more than she wanted them to. She handed over her ID, barely able to meet his eyes. The man typed something into the computer. After a moment, his brows knit slightly. "It says here the box was accessed 5 times this year." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "5," she repeated, her voice dry brittle. "Yes, ma'am. Most recently 3 weeks ago. Shall I retrieve the sign-in log?" Miles stepped in. "That won't be necessary. She just needs access." The young man stood. "Of course. Follow me, please." The vault hallway was colder, lit with flat fluorescent light. No windows, no sunlight. Just steel and concrete, and the thudding heartbeat in Evelyn's chest. The man unlocked the vault with a long brass key and gestured to a private viewing room. Inside, he placed the narrow metal box on the table and politely stepped out. Evelyn and Miles stood over it in silence. "You okay?" he asked. Evelyn didn't answer. Her hands reached for the lid as if compelled by something ancient inevitable. The box groaned open with a soft metallic protest, and then she saw them. Papers, folders, neatly stacked and bound with labeled clips. Evelyn reached out her fingers, grazing the edge of the first folder, then slowly opened it. The top document was a mortgage agreement. Her name, her signature, her handwriting, but not. Miles leaned in beside her, eyes scanning quickly. Initials, here, full signature. This is a full closing packet. The next document was a warranty deed transferring property ownership of 1124 Mayflower Drive to her. Signed, dated, notarized. She blinked, the room spinning. I never signed." Miles shook his head. "The handwriting is close enough to fool most. But there's something off. Your capital E's are always looped. These aren't. These..." Evelyn reached for another folder, slower this time. Her hands felt too heavy. Inside were copies of documents she didn't even understand. Loan authorizations, escrow instructions, power of attorney forms. All of them bearing her name. All of them binding. And all of them fraudulent. Her throat tightened. Her knees threatened to buckle. She had to sit. "There's more," Miles said, frowning at a thin manila envelope nestled at the bottom of the box. He pulled it out, gently opened the flap, and slid the contents onto the table. Photographs. They weren't high quality, grainy, taken at odd angles, but they were unmistakable. The first was Evelyn herself at her kitchen table, slumped forward slightly, pen in hand, eyes unfocused, wearing her nightgown, hair uncombed. Another photo, she was holding a sheet of paper, mouth slightly open, eyelids drooping. Then another, signing something with her left hand, supporting her head, clearly fighting consciousness. Evelyn stared at them in horror. It was her, caught in her own home, caught in some in-between state, conscious but not lucid, awake but unaware. And Bianca, her shadow visible in one corner of the frame, blurred but unmistakable in silhouette, holding a phone, watching. Evelyn couldn't breathe. She pushed the photos away like they burned. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She stood up, stumbled backward. The room suddenly felt too tight, the air too thin. Her hand reached out to the wall, steadying herself as her vision blurred. Miles came around the table quickly. "Evelyn, sit, breathe." She dropped into the chair, shaking her head. "She drugged me," she said, the words escaping like a secret torn from her soul. "She drugged me, Miles. My own daughter." Miles didn't argue. He didn't try to soften it. Because it was true. Evelyn buried her face in her hands. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Just the hum of the fluorescent lights above, and the sound of something breaking quietly inside a woman who had survived heartbreak, widowhood, and years of sacrifice, but had never imagined betrayal like this. "She used me," Evelyn whispered almost to herself. "She sat across from me, poured my tea, smiled at me, and planned every step." Miles finished grimly. Evelyn lifted her head slowly, her eyes filled with something far colder than tears. "She did this for a house?" she asked. "For some luxury condo in a city I don't even live in?" Miles shook his head. "It was never just about the house. It's about power, access. She knew no one would question you, knew you'd never look too close. She built the perfect cover. All she needed was your trust. Evelyn stared at the photos again. I gave her everything. I raised her alone. I taught her to walk, to read. I went without vacations, new clothes, even heating some winters so she could have piano lessons, school trips, opportunities. Her voice cracked, and she used my name like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. Miles gently closed the box. This isn't just betrayal, Evelyn. It's a crime, multiple crimes. She nodded, her jaw clenched. I want to know everything, every document, every account, every lie. I want it all. You'll have it, Miles said. But you need to be prepared. This could get worse before it gets better. I'm not afraid of worse, she said quietly. I'm afraid of not doing anything. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Then we start now. As they left the vault, Evelyn felt something solidify inside her. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was clarity and grief. Grief for the woman she thought her daughter was, and grief for the mother she could no longer afford to be. The days that followed blurred together like smudged notes on a forgotten sheet of music. Evelyn didn't open the blinds for 3 mornings in a row. Dust gathered on the windowsill where she used to place her fresh-cut roses. The piano went untouched. Even the children she taught sensed something was wrong. One by one, she canceled lessons with tight apologies and vague reasons. Her students' mothers left voicemails. "Hope you're okay, Ms. Ashcroft, and let us know if you need anything," but Evelyn never called back. Her house had become a sanctuary of shadows. But it was not peace she found in the silence, it was collapse. She couldn't sleep. She tried warm baths, soft music, even warm milk, like her mother used to give her. But the moment she closed her eyes, she'd see the photographs again. Her own face, glassy-eyed hand scrawling a signature she didn't remember making. Her nightgown, her kitchen, her daughter watching from the edge of the frame like a ghost with a clipboard. At 3:00 a.m., Evelyn would sit in her living room wrapped in a quilt, staring into the dark, wondering where she had failed. Not just legally, not just financially, but morally. As a mother, what kind of daughter drugs her mother? What kind of mother raises that daughter? But anger, real, pulsing, righteous anger, arrived on the 4th day. It came quietly. She was reading an article online about elder financial abuse and saw the term used clinically detached. Perpetrators are often close family members. The abuse can be gradual, manipulative, and masked as love. She slammed the laptop shut and stood up. No, this wasn't just betrayal. This was theater performed behind her back under her roof. And she had been cast as the silent supporting role. She wouldn't be silent anymore. But Evelyn also wasn't a woman driven by vengeance. She wasn't impulsive. She believed in dignity and poise, in the sharp edge of truth, not the brute force of confrontation. She wasn't going to the police, not yet. She would do this her way. She would let Bianca bury herself with her own words, her own arrogance. She would unveil her carefully built lie at the place she'd never expect, surrounded by the very people whose approval she secretly craved. The idea came like a soft chord resolving a dissonant melody. A birthday party. Her 69th birthday wasn't for another 6 months, but who would question a celebration early? A surprise from Evelyn herself. She would invite family old friends, Bianca's peers, those carefully curated friends who admired Bianca's success. She'd create the perfect stage. Then she would reveal it all, not in anger, but in truth. She began the work in secret. The first step was organizing the documents Miles had helped her scan and print duplicates of every forged form. The mortgage contract, the deed, the power of attorney documents, and the damning photographs. She placed them in a dark blue folder marked Evidence, Private. She made 3 copies. One went into a fireproof lockbox under her bed. The second went to Miles. The third, labeled in red, would be used at the party. She rehearsed the confrontation in her head for days, how she would smile as Bianca arrived, how she would stand to give her speech, how she'd lift the folder and offer it like a mirror. But there was still more to prepare. Evelyn sat at her desk one morning and pulled out her old legal folder. She opened her will typed, signed last revised 5 years ago, and read through it slowly. Her assets were modest, her home, her pension savings, a few heirlooms. Everything had been designated to Bianca. Not anymore. She rewrote the document entirely. Bianca's name was removed. Evelyn instead left her estate to the Children's Music Endowment, a fund for free music lessons for underprivileged kids. She added a provision to allow Miles to act as executor, then signed it with a hand steadier than it had been in weeks. It was done. She felt like she could breathe again. The next morning she cleaned the house as if preparing for company. She opened every window. She played Debussy again, fingers trembling slightly, but gaining strength with each note. She vacuumed, she baked, she watered her roses. The world long muted returned to color. That evening she made the call. Bianca answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom, you've been quiet. I've had a lot on my mind," Evelyn said, her voice calm, steady. "Listen, I've decided to do something a little out of character." "Oh, I want to throw a party," she said. "A little birthday gathering next weekend. Just something small. Friends, family. I've been feeling reflective." There was a pause, then Bianca laughed softly. "That's unexpected, but nice. You deserve a party. Turning 70 is a big deal." "It's only 69, Evelyn corrected. "Well, you've always liked to be ahead of schedule," Bianca teased. Evelyn smiled faintly. "That's true. I'll be there," Bianca promised. "Do you want help planning it?" "No," Evelyn said gently. "I want this to be mine, my way." Bianca didn't suspect a thing. They talked a few more minutes, nothing meaningful. Evelyn mentioned some old friends she was inviting, and Bianca offered to bring wine. Evelyn thanked her. Everything about the call was so normal, so effortless, that it almost hurt. After hanging up, Evelyn sat in the dim of her living room, tea in hand, eyes on the shadowed corner where the light didn't reach. She whispered to the dark, "I trusted you." Then louder, "And now you're going to answer for it." The week leading up to the party became a kind of ritual. She bought decorations blue and gold, nothing too flashy. She ordered catering from a local bakery, just finger foods and a strawberry cake. She called relatives she hadn't spoken to in years, her sister-in-law from Georgia, a cousin from Richmond, a few old piano students, now adults with children of their own. To each one she said the same thing. "I'm throwing a little gathering. I'd love to see you. And I may need your help." She didn't explain more, but those who loved her came anyway. By Friday, everything was in place. The folder was ready. The speech was written, printed, folded into her purse. The die-twin of her life years of discipline, silence, love, and sacrifice had reached its unresolved chord, and Evelyn was ready to strike the final note. The scent of strawberries and champagne floated through the air, mingling with the soft notes of a jazz quartet Evelyn had hired for the evening. It was a crisp Saturday in December, and her living room, normally so quiet, so solitary, now glowed with warm light and warm voices. Old friends embraced like time hadn't passed. Cousins from out of state brought hugs and casseroles. Former piano students returned as adults, greeting her with nostalgic smiles and respectful nods. Everyone had dressed up expecting a celebration. What they got was something else entirely. Evelyn stood near the fireplace, graceful as ever in a slate-gray dress, with a brooch shaped like a music note pinned over her heart. She looked beautiful in that timeless, dignified way some women carry into their 60s. Her hands were folded gently at her waist, but her knuckles were tight white, betraying the calm exterior. Bianca arrived fashionably late, as always, heels clicking, coat perfectly draped over her arm, a bottle of Pinot in one hand and an apology ready on her lips. "Sorry, Mom, work ran long, investor calls, but you look amazing." She leaned in to kiss Evelyn on the cheek. Evelyn offered her one of those tight smiles, the kind that hides more than it reveals. "I'm glad you could make it," she said. Bianca slipped off her coat and handed the wine to someone nearby. She moved through the room like a practiced hostess, shaking hands, exchanging laughter, accepting compliments. No one suspected. No one except Evelyn. At 7:45, Evelyn tapped her fork lightly against the rim of her teacup. The room quieted with the ease of habit. She had always commanded attention without effort, and tonight was no different. "I want to thank you all," she began, her voice strong, unwavering, "for being here tonight. For showing up for me in this moment, in this house, and in this truth." A few guests chuckled politely, unsure what she meant. Bianca leaned back against the mantel, swirling wine in her glass. Evelyn continued, "Most of you know me as a teacher, a woman of order, music, discipline, logic. What you may not know is how unprepared I was for what this past year has taught me about betrayal, about silence, and about what trust looks like when it's broken. Now the air shifted. You could feel it, like the seconds before a storm. Bianca straightened her smile, faltering. She looked around as if expecting someone to break the tension. No one did. Evelyn reached into her handbag and pulled out a dark blue folder, the one marked in red. I'd like to share with you all a few things I discovered recently. She turned toward this projector screen set up in the corner of the living room. Miles, standing quietly near the dining table, nodded and clicked his remote. The screen lit up with the first image, a grainy photograph. Evelyn in her kitchen, slouched, pen in hand, unfocused. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The next slide, Evelyn in her nightgown, signing a document, clearly sedated. Another, her daughter's shadowy figure in the frame. The fourth slide was a scanned image of the mortgage contract, Evelyn's name on every page, her signature forged, her life mortgaged. Bianca's wine glass dropped to the floor with a sharp, brittle shatter. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Evelyn didn't flinch. "That's my kitchen, my table, my body, signing away my name, my future, my credit, my identity." The room was utterly still. All eyes shifted to Bianca, whose skin had gone pale beneath her flawless makeup. I don't understand," she began. Evelyn turned to her. "No. Would you like me to explain it to you in front of everyone, or shall I play the audio message of your voicemail asking about the envelopes you stole from my mailbox?" Bianca shook her head slowly. "This isn't fair. You don't know the whole story." "I know enough," Evelyn said. "I know that 5 times this year you accessed my safe deposit box without my memory or consent. I know you forged my signature to secure a $380,000 loan and used me as the collateral. I know that you drugged me. You put something in my tea. Every visit." Bianca's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes were darting, frantic, like an animal cornered. "I was protecting us," she burst out suddenly. "I was doing it for us, for our future. You don't understand how hard it's been." There it was, the confession. The room inhaled as one. Someone near the kitchen muttered, "Oh my God, you could have just asked me." Evelyn said, her voice now quiet, razor sharp. "But you didn't want to ask. You wanted to take. Because you knew I'd say no." Bianca's mascara had begun to smudge. "I was drowning in debt," she choked out. "The condo was a sure thing. I had buyers lined up. I just needed the loan to secure it before the price jumped. It was supposed to be temporary, Mom. Just a signature. You wouldn't have even noticed." Evelyn's face hardened. "You're right. I wouldn't have, because I trusted you." Bianca fell to her knees, emotion so unexpected it broke the tension like a snapped string. "Please," she sobbed, shaking mascara, streaking her cheeks. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't just hurt me," Evelyn said coldly. "You violated me." No one moved, not even Miles. The silence was complete. Then Evelyn turned to the crowd, scanning the stunned faces, friends, family, neighbors. "I didn't share this tonight to shame her," she said. "I shared it because too many of us, especially women, especially mothers, suffer in silence, afraid of what truth will destroy. But I've realized something: silence doesn't protect love. It protects lies." She held up the folder. "This is the truth, and it's mine again." A slow, uncertain wave of applause began, not loud, not cheerful, but real, affirming. One by one, people nodded, some with tears, some with clenched jaws. The betrayal had become collective, the justice cathartic. Bianca remained on the floor, trembling, humiliated, broken. Evelyn looked down at her daughter, the same girl she had once rocked to sleep, the same child she'd once taught to read. Then she said, her voice cool and clear, "Thank you, Bianca, for finally telling the truth." And with that, Evelyn turned and walked away from the firelight into a silence entirely her own. The party ended not with music, but with silence. A deep, stunned silence that lingered long after the last guest had left, as if the house itself were trying to absorb what had just unfolded. Bianca had been helped up from the floor by one of her old friends, Clara, the bridesmaid, who had once toasted her resilience and ambition. Now Clara couldn't even look her in the eye. Evelyn remained standing near the fireplace, perfectly still, Her brooch glinted under the lamplight, but her eyes had gone distant, composed but not calm, steady but not soft. Miles was the last to speak. "We need to talk," he said quietly, gently guiding Evelyn and Bianca into the sitting room. Bianca's knees buckled as she dropped into the armchair. Her cheeks were blotchy, her shoulders hunched in on themselves. She looked nothing like the sharp, commanding woman who had walked into the party an hour earlier. Now she was a figure undone. Before Miles could begin, a voice cut through the tension like a cold blade. "I think this is a criminal matter," said a man standing near the bookshelf. Joseph Ashcroft, Evelyn's cousin. A retired attorney with decades in corporate law, Joseph had always been a quiet man, but when he spoke, people listened. She forged legal documents, stole an identity, falsified a loan under someone else's name. This isn't just immoral, it's illegal. Bianca's head snapped up. "Uncle Joseph, please." He held up a hand. "Don't. You know what this is. And if she weren't your mother, the police would already be here." Miles nodded slowly. "He's not wrong, Evelyn." All eyes turned to her, but Evelyn didn't flinch. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but resolute. "I won't press charges." The room froze. Joseph blinked. "Evelyn, are you sure?" "I'm not doing this for her," she said without looking at Bianca. "I'm doing this for myself. I don't want my name dragged through courtrooms and headlines. I don't want to spend what years I have left sitting in depositions testifying about my own humiliation." She turned her gaze now cold toward her daughter. "But there will be conditions, ironclad, non-negotiable." Bianca looked up slowly, eyes rimmed with red. "I'll do anything," she whispered. "Please." Evelyn walked to the desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a folder. Inside were 3 sets of documents prepared in advance by Miles. The first was a full revocation of all powers of attorney, financial or medical, previously signed or implied. The second, a signed affidavit acknowledging that Bianca had falsified documents, used Evelyn's personal information without consent, and incurred financial liability in Evelyn's name. The third, a formal notarized release, granting Evelyn full control of any property or transaction associated with her identity for the past 2 years. "This is what you'll sign," Evelyn said, "in front of witnesses, tonight." Bianca blinked at the pages as though they were written in a foreign language. Her hands shook as she reached for the pen Miles slid across the table. "And when you're done," Evelyn continued, "you will stand up, and in front of every person still in this house, you will say what you did, out loud, not as an excuse, as a confession." Bianca stared at her. "You want to humiliate me more?" "No," Evelyn said. "I want you to understand the weight of what you did. I want you to say the words, feel them in your mouth, hear them in your own voice. Because someday, if you ever want to become someone worthy of forgiveness, it will begin there." Bianca didn't speak. She just bowed her head. Miles stepped forward and began reading the documents aloud, line by line, confirming Bianca's understanding. Joseph stood behind him, nodding at the legal language, occasionally interjecting with, "That's enforceable," or "good clause there." When it came time to sign, Bianca hesitated. Evelyn raised a brow. "You said you'd do anything." Bianca picked up the pen. Her signature was barely legible, scrawled through tears and shame. Miles initialed the bottom as witness. Joseph added his signature as co-observer. It was done. Bianca exhaled like she'd just signed her own sentencing. And in a way she had. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She turned to Miles. "Gather the remaining guests. I want this said before the last light leaves this house." Miles nodded and stepped outside to the backyard where a few family members lingered in hushed whispers. Wordlessly, they filed back, and Clara Joseph's wife, Marianne Evelyn's niece, Olivia, and even Evelyn's former student, Ruthie, now in her 30s, who had once written a college essay about Ms. Ashcroft, the woman who taught me how to fight for my own voice. They all sat unsure of what they were about to witness. Evelyn didn't explain. She simply turned to Bianca. "Now." Bianca stood slowly, knees trembling. She began, but her voice cracked. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Bianca swallowed. "I forged documents in my mother's name. I took out a mortgage loan she didn't authorize. I lied about her consent. I accessed her accounts. I drugged her to get signatures." The words fell like stones, one by one, heavy, final. Someone audibly gasped. I did it because I was desperate, because I wanted more, and I didn't think she'd find out. I didn't think she mattered enough to stop me. Now the room was utterly still. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice low, fierce, unshaking. I don't need anyone's forgiveness. Not hers. Not yours, she said, scanning the room. I'm not asking you to pity me. I'm asking you to remember that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the person whose first cry you held in your arms, from the child you'd have walked into fire for. She turned to Bianca. And sometimes the only justice you'll get is the moment when the liar finally looks up and sees what she's become. Bianca's lips quivered. Mom, no, Evelyn said, holding up her hand. I don't want an apology. I want change. And you don't get to ask for forgiveness until you prove that you've earned it. She took the signed documents from the table and slid them into the folder, closing it with a soft final snap. I'm done being your victim. Then she turned and walked away past the stunned faces, the flickering candlelight, and the shattered image of a daughter she no longer recognized. Her heels made no sound on the hardwood floor, but the silence she left in her wake said everything. The real goodbye didn't happen with shouting or slammed doors. It happened in the early morning silence 3 weeks after the party, as Evelyn stood at the threshold of her home, her once sanctuary, with a single suitcase in hand. The sunlight filtered softly through the lace curtains, casting familiar patterns on the wooden floors. She touched the edge of the piano bench one last time, then turned and left without looking back. She had already sold the house, quietly, efficiently. The realtor, a kind woman in her 40s named Angela, never asked why Evelyn wanted it listed as is, or why she seemed in such a hurry to close the chapter. Angela only nodded when Evelyn said, I want a clean deal, nothing sentimental, and I want to be gone before spring. 2 weeks later, the paperwork was finalized. Evelyn packed lightly. Just her music books, her worn metronome, her handwritten lesson notes from the last 3 decades, a kettle, 2 mugs, and the brooch shaped like a music note. She left behind most of her furniture, her dishes, her winter coats. She didn't want the weight of anything that had watched her fall apart. She headed east, to a coastal town she hadn't visited in decades, Wilmington, North Carolina. She remembered it from a trip Leonard had planned before his heart gave out, before Bianca grew up, before betrayal was even imaginable. Back then it had seemed too sleepy for a woman in her prime. Now it was perfect. The cottage was small, nestled between 2 pine trees, on a quiet residential street that dead-ended at the shoreline. White shutters, a blue-painted porch, the kind of place where you could sit in the evening and hear nothing but wind chimes and distant gulls. The real estate listing had called it quaint. Evelyn called it sanctuary. The first night she slept there, she didn't dream. The first morning she awoke with the sun and no dread in her chest. That in itself felt like a kind of miracle. She began again, slowly. Every morning she made tea. Earl Grey, strong, no sugar. She walked barefoot on the cool porch, listening to the gulls chatter as they rode the ocean breeze. The salt air revived her lungs in ways she hadn't expected. There was something cleansing about the wind here, as though it had been designed to wash out everything you couldn't say. Within 2 weeks she hung a wooden sign outside the front gate, Miss Evelyn's music room, free piano lessons for kids. It didn't take long. At first, just 1 child came. Sophia, a quiet 9-year-old who lived 2 houses down and had never touched a piano before. Her mother, a waitress working double shifts, knocked hesitantly on Evelyn's door one morning, asking if the sign was for real. Yes, Evelyn smiled, it's very real. Sophia showed up the next day in a threadbare pink hoodie, her shoes 1 size too small. But she listened. She tried. And when her small fingers first stumbled through middle C, Evelyn felt something in her chest unlock. Not pride, not nostalgia, purpose. Soon after word spread. The neighborhood mothers talked. Children showed up in 2s, then 4s. By the end of the month, Evelyn had 10 regular students, none of them with money, some without fathers, many without stability, but all of them with music waiting to be born in their hands. Evelyn taught from 900 a.m. to noon, 3 days a week. She didn't take payment. Sometimes the mothers brought baked goods. One brought flowers from her garden. One offered to clean her windows. Evelyn accepted all of it with gratitude and no conditions. In the afternoon she walked, not out of routine but out of hunger for light, for air, for the sound of her own feet on sand. The path to the beach became her meditation. Sometimes she walked for 20 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. She never brought her phone. She never wore shoes. And for the first time in years, she felt no need to explain where she was going. She was going forward. Evenings were her favorite. She'd sit by the window with a soft shawl over her shoulders and play, not for an audience, not for instruction, just for herself. Bach, Debussy, a few jazz standards when the mood called for it. Music poured from her fingers not as discipline, but as freedom. And slowly the woman who had once been hollowed by betrayal began to fill back in note by note. Then one Sunday morning, while browsing the local library, she overheard 2 women whispering in the corner about starting a support circle for single older women, but neither had the confidence to do it. Evelyn closed her book, stood up, walked straight over and said, "I'll host it. Wednesday nights, bring tea, no judgment." And so the next Wednesday 4 women sat in Evelyn's living room, none of them knowing quite what to expect. One had been widowed for 15 years. One had never married. One had left a man after 30 years of silence. One had raised a son who no longer spoke to her. They didn't cry right away, that came later. At first they just drank tea, talked about books, and argued about music. But over the weeks they grew louder, freer, warmer. They brought stories. They brought pain. They brought laughter that echoed through the house like sunlight after a storm. Evelyn called it the Wednesday Harmony Circle. It wasn't just about healing, it was about choosing joy again. They talked about grief, about motherhood, about starting over at an age when the world tells you to settle down and fade into quiet. They didn't fade, they shined. Sometimes one of the mothers from the music students would stay late, confide quietly. Evelyn listened, always listened. She didn't give advice unless asked. But when she did speak, it carried weight not from authority, but from survival. One day, Ruth, the baker's wife, placed a hand over Evelyn's as she stood up to leave and said, "You don't just teach music. You bring women back to themselves." That night, Evelyn cried. For the first time, not from pain, but from knowing she hadn't disappeared. She had been buried, but not gone. And now she was blooming again. In the soft light of her seaside home, in the laughter of children learning to play in the cups of tea, passed between women who had thought they were too old to begin again. Her days were no longer measured by what she'd lost, but by what she gave. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was freedom. It was a Thursday afternoon, the air thick with the scent of ocean salt and camellias, when Evelyn first saw the figure at the edge of her gate. She had just finished her last piano lesson for the day. Young Louise had finally mastered Twinkle, Twinkle, and Evelyn was rewarding herself with a warm cup of tea and the soft rustling of pages from a memoir she'd been reading. The living room was bathed in golden sunlight, the kind that only existed in late afternoons along the coast, when time seemed slower and kinder. She saw the shadow before the face, a hesitant silhouette not moving, just standing, holding something. Evelyn stood slowly and walked to the front window. Her heart paused, not skipped, not raced, paused. It was Bianca, thinner, paler. Her once sharp cheekbones now hollow, her suit traded for a wrinkled gray sweater that clung to her like a memory. Her hair, once perfectly straightened and gleaming, was now tied back in a low bun, uneven, rushed. Her eyes, even from across the distance, looked dark and tired, 2 wells drained of whatever fire had once made her a predator in the financial world. Bianca didn't step through the gate. She remained outside, holding a folded envelope in her hands, as if it weighed more than her entire body. She looked up once, toward the house, toward her mother's window. Evelyn didn't move. Her fingers gripped the edge of the curtain, heart steady but distant. There was no anger anymore. Just memory and distance. So much distance. Bianca didn't call out. She didn't cry. She simply placed the envelope on the garden bench outside the gate, adjusted her coat with a trembling hand, and turned to walk away. She never looked back. Evelyn waited until she was gone, fully gone, not just out of sight, but until the sound of her hesitant footsteps no longer touched the gravel road. Then she opened the door. The envelope was plain, cream-colored, no name on the front, no decoration. Inside a single sheet of paper folded carefully, deliberately. She closed the door, sat at the piano bench, and slowly unfolded the letter. It was handwritten. The penmanship had changed, less rigid, less proud. Each line slightly slanted as if the words had lost their footing. Mom, I know I have no right to ask for anything. Not forgiveness, not time, not even your attention. But I've thought of nothing else. I see your face every morning, not the angry one from the party, the quiet one, the one I remember when I was 5 sitting under the piano while you played Debussy on rainy afternoons. I remember the way your hands moved, how soft your voice was when you said music doesn't lie. I think that's what I envy most, your ability to live without deceit. I used to think your life was small. I used to pity you, but now I envy you. I would give anything for one day of that kind of peace. What I did to you, there are no words. I've tried to explain it to myself, to therapists, to friends I've already lost. But there's no explanation that makes it less ugly. It was greed, fear, pride, ego. I justified it by telling myself you wouldn't notice, that you were old, that you'd be fine. But the truth is, I didn't want to ask, because I already knew the answer would be no. And even now I know this letter doesn't erase what I did. It doesn't unsign those documents. It doesn't undo the nights you laid awake wondering who I had become. But I want you to know, I'm sorry, truly, fully. Not because I was caught, not because the family knows, but because I finally understand what I lost. You were my mother, my anchor, the one person who stood by me when no one else would, and I broke you. I betrayed you. I am rebuilding my life now, slowly, with help, with humility I never had before. I don't expect anything from you. But if you ever wonder, I am trying, every day, because you taught me what it means to have grace. And even if I never hear your voice again, I want you to know that lesson saved me. I love you, Mom. Bianca. Evelyn stared at the letter long after she finished reading it. Her tea had gone cold. The house had fallen into a hush, the kind that wasn't lonely but reverent. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She sat in stillness, letting the words echo through the quiet. For a long time she simply held the letter against her chest. Then she stood, crossed the room, and placed it gently atop the piano, resting it next to the old photo of her and Bianca from years ago, when Bianca was still a little girl in pigtails, grinning under a canopy of cherry blossoms. The letter would stay there, not as a wound, not as forgiveness, but as memory, as evidence that even the broken sometimes try to heal. That night Evelyn played Debussy, alone, and for the first time in a long time she didn't feel hollow. She didn't feel triumphant either. She just felt whole, and that was enough. The flyer was printed in simple black and white, an evening of music by the sea, a celebration of renewal. It was taped to every cafe window in town, tucked into mailboxes, shared by hand between neighbors, and pinned to church bulletin boards. Evelyn didn't want something flashy. She didn't want attention. She wanted community. She wanted to give back what music had given her breath, structure, solace. The concert was held in the old town square beneath a canopy of string lights that flickered like fireflies. Folding chairs filled quickly. Mothers with toddlers on their hips, retired veterans in pressed slacks, teenagers with earbuds dangling from their pockets, all drawn to something simple human. At the heart of it all stood Evelyn, dressed in a flowing navy blouse, hair swept back, brooch sparkling beneath the lights. But this wasn't about her. It was about the 10 children who now knew the difference between a quarter note and a rest. It was about Louise, who performed Claire de Lune with a trembling grace that brought tears to an old man's eyes in the front row. About Sophia, who bowed after her duet with another girl and said, "Thank you, Miss Evelyn," into the microphone, with a pride so raw it made Evelyn's throat tighten. When the last chord faded and applause filled the night air, Evelyn stood behind the keyboard for just a moment longer. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The music had already said everything. That night wasn't just a concert. It was a resurrection, and it sparked something new. Within weeks, the Wednesday Harmony Circle evolved from a quiet support group into a full-fledged community arts initiative. Retired teachers, widowed painters, and even Miles, who it turned out played cello in college, began to show up every week offering their time and talents. They called it the Haven. Carol, a former dance instructor who hadn't moved her body in years, began teaching movement classes for seniors. Faye, a widowed literature professor, led poetry readings that made the women laugh and cry and clap in equal measure. Even Miles brought in a friend from Wilmington's Bar Association to offer free legal literacy workshops for elderly women because, as Evelyn had quietly reminded him one evening, most of us don't know what we've signed until it's too late. The Haven became more than a club. It became a lighthouse. One day in early spring, Evelyn received a letter in a new envelope. The handwriting was familiar. The return address had changed. This time, Bianca didn't write a full page. It was a single line. "I'd like to see you. Talk, please." Evelyn sat with the letter for an hour. Then she opened her drawer, pulled out a clean sheet of paper, and wrote 6 words. "Chữa lành là trách nhiệm của con. Healing is your responsibility." She mailed it that afternoon and never sent another word. There was no anger in the refusal, no finality, just a boundary, a firm, quiet reminder that not all bridges could be rebuilt, and not all needed to be. A few weeks later, Evelyn received a call from a woman named Dr. Winifred Bellamy, who introduced herself as a program director for the Women Beyond Betrayal Conference, a gathering dedicated to healing empowerment and resilience for women over 50. "We've heard of your story," Dr. Bellamy said gently, "and we think others should too." Evelyn hesitated. "I'm not a speaker." "You're a survivor," Dr. Bellamy replied. "That's all anyone will need." And so, in early May, Evelyn stood behind a wooden podium in a modest auditorium filled with folding chairs and cautious hearts. The women in the room had seen things: abandonment, infidelity, financial ruin, emotional erosion, but their eyes met hers with a kind of fierce curiosity. She didn't speak from notes. She spoke from memory, from nights spent staring at her ceiling in silence, from the moment she realized her name had been signed without her soul, from the soft return of music in her fingers, from the laughter of women who thought they were too old to laugh again. "I am not here to talk about betrayal," she told the audience. "I'm here to talk about what comes after, the quiet hours, the rebuilding, the choosing every morning not to be bitter, but to be free." A murmur of affirmation passed through the crowd. "Forgiveness is not owed," she continued. "Sometimes it's not even helpful. What's helpful is reclaiming your story, your name, your voice." She paused, eyes shining. And that voice, when shared, might just be the note someone else is waiting to hear. When she finished, the standing ovation didn't come immediately. It came slowly, organically, like rain after a drought. Women rose one by one, tears in their eyes, hands on hearts. It wasn't applause for eloquence. It was applause for recognition. Evelyn stepped off the stage and into a dozen arms surrounded by women who whispered thank you like a prayer. That night she walked alone down a quiet beach road, moonlight painting silver on the waves. She felt no ache, no need to be heard. She had spoken. She had healed. And in doing so, she had given others permission to do the same. It arrived in early autumn. The air had begun to shift brisker, sharper, scented with fallen leaves and salt. Evelyn was in the garden pruning the last of the dahlias when the mail carrier waved from the street and handed her a large, thick envelope. She knew instantly by the weight of it, by the pen pressure etched into the return address. Bianca, again. Evelyn didn't sigh. She didn't flinch. She simply turned the envelope over in her hand. There was no decoration this time, no pleading message scrawled on the back. Just her name in neat, deliberate cursive, the kind of handwriting Bianca used when she was trying her best to be formal, polished, controlled. Evelyn knew the contents before even opening it. 20 pages, maybe more. Long-form contrition, maybe a journal, a chronology of remorse, a plea. She stood on her porch for a long moment. Then she walked inside, and placed the envelope gently untouched on the top of her upright piano, right beside the first letter, the one she had read, the one that had taken her weeks to fully exhale from. She didn't open this one. She didn't need to. It wasn't that she didn't care. It was that she had learned the difference between carrying pain and carrying forward. There were children waiting in her music room. Louise was trying to master a new jazz progression. Sophia had begun composing her own melody, something light and wandering like wind through reeds. Evelyn returned to them without a word about the letter, without a pause in her step. She entered the room with the kind of calm that comes not from certainty but from choice, from healing. She smiled, and as she leaned over Louise's shoulder to correct his posture, her voice was light but clear. "Slow down, darling. Let the note breathe before you jump to the next." He nodded, adjusting his fingers. The lesson continued like always, like nothing had arrived at all. That evening, after the sun had begun to settle beneath the horizon and the world had quieted to a hush, Evelyn lit a single candle on the piano and sat before it. The unsealed letter remained beside her, an unopened monument to a past that no longer dictated her present. She played, not because she needed to, because she could, because her fingers still remembered what it was like to create something true, something that didn't ask for justification, something that didn't beg or explain. Music. It didn't lie, as the first few notes of her favorite Debussy prelude filled the air. Golden light from the setting sun filtered through the lace curtains, dancing across the walls like whispered forgiveness. Her voice came in softly, not spoken aloud, but in memory, a narration that could have been hers or ours. "I once lost everything because of a single word, trust. But in losing it, I learned how to heal without permission." The camera would have pulled back now in silence. Evelyn seated at her piano, the two letters beside her, one opened, one not. The music swelling, not triumphant but whole, not loud but lasting. The woman who had once been broken was no longer seeking closure. She had become it. And through her music, through her quiet resistance, through her unwavering refusal to be destroyed by betrayal, she had already forgiven, not to free Bianca, but to free herself. As the final notes echoed into the twilight, the screen would have faded to black, leaving only the sound of a woman at peace. A single chord held just long enough to let the silence catch its breath.